Hey everyone, welcome to another summer cookie tutorial. Today I'll be showing you how to make my under the sea themed cookies. Let's get started. First off, we have our whale cookie. So here I'm going to use a light blue. I have all the colors listed below the video in the description, and I'm going to start with my outline here. This is my thick consistency, and I'm not going to outline all the way around the whale. I'm going to leave the bottom of his belly white. So here, that's why I kind of did that upside down V towards the bottom of the cookie. And again, anytime there's a point or a sharp corner, I always touch my bag down. If there's a rounded edge, I try not to touch my bag down. It's not the end of the world if you have to kind of move your hands around again to make yourself feel comfortable. It's okay. But if you can try it on those rounded edges, keep your bag in the air. That helps to give you a nice smooth line. And now I'm just going to use the same icing, so this is still my outline consistency, and I'm going to put a little squiggle in his tail because it's a narrow area and it's prone to craters, so this will help the icing stay nice and puffy there and not fall in on itself. And so here I'm going in with my flood icing, and I always use two consistencies when I'm decorating. I find it gives me nice sharp edges, it gives my design a sharper look, and prevents my flood from going over the edge. If you're looking for a good icing recipe, or how I make my consistencies after I make my icing, you can check out my royal icing video and I'll link it below as well. And you can always go in with your scribe if you need to fix a little things. I find in very sharp points, like in his tail here, the point is very narrow, and so your flood might, if you push too hard on your bag or you go too close to the edge, you might overflow that area. So whenever I get to a very narrow point like that, I let go of the pressure of my bag, and sometimes I'll take my scribe and pull it more to the edge if I can't quite get in there with the tip of my bag. And I always try to flood a little bit over my outline to hide it, and sometimes I'll use my bag to kind of spread the icing around or smooth it out. And then after I flood this, I'm going to leave this to dry for a little while to crust over, so that when I do my next section, there'll be a little bit of a separation. If I did the next section right now, the icing would kind of melt together in a smooth, flat surface, but I want them to be kind of distinct sections. So now that it's dried, I'm going to go in and outline my white part here. This is his belly. And normally when I decorate cookies, I would move on to, my other cookies. I would do all my whale cookies at the same time. And then I would, the first one would be drying while I'm doing the next one, and so on. So then when I go back to do this part here, the blue section would already be dry and I can go in and do the white section. In this, video, I'm just showing you, I won't be showing you the drying times, but obviously, I have to wait for those cookies to dry a little bit to move on to the next sections. So normally what I'll do is I'll do certain steps, the first steps of all the cookies, then I'll come back and do the second steps. That way I'm not waiting around for cookies to dry and doing nothing, and I can kind of keep decorating. With this white part, we have some narrow points here, so I'm just pulling it through with my scribe. And I'm trying to push that icing right up to the blue part of the top of his belly. Now for the eye, I'm going to take my outline consistency. This is nice and thick, so it holds its shape here. I don't want it kind of flooding into a big puddle. And when you put a lot of icing, thicker icing, it's really easy to smooth out there with a little jiggle. And then right inside, while it's still wet, I go in with my black outline icing, give it a little jiggle if there's a little peak there. And then I'm going to put a little white in his eyeball. So here I'm taking my scribe and I'm taking a little dollop of icing just on the tip of my scribe, and I'm going to touch it down into the black part of his eye. This is a great little trick. I find, when you put that little white dot, it really makes a difference in the eyes. And then I'm going to do his little fin here. Now this is my outline consistency. This is a very small area. It's a smaller cookie. So after I outline, I'm just going to go right in there with my outline consistency, and I'm just going to fill this area. Now, if your outline consistency is super thick, it's really hard to smooth out, but if it's, if you fill it enough, you make it a nice thick layer, it's very easy to smooth out. You can see as I'm jiggling, I'm just working the icing in here just till it gets nice and smooth. And that way it keeps it nice and puffy. And I feel like it needs a little something, so I'm going to go ahead and outline the blue part here. And normally I don't outline on top of my flood, but I feel like this cookie needs a little something extra. So I'm going to outline just the blue part here. trying to be as careful as possible because I'm not going to be hiding this outline with my flood. And again, anytime you need to fix anything, you can always go in with your scribe. Here, I touched down and it kind of had a little peak, so just smooth it out a bit. And just take your time, go slow. You don't have to rush to do these outlines in the flood. Take your time. You can see I have my left finger against the bag, and I'm holding the bag with my right hand. So this is keeping my hand super steady. It's almost piping two-handed. And again, at the round parts, I don't want to touch my bag down to keep a nice smooth line. And then I'm just going to put a little smile here. And I think he came out really cute. Okay, next we have our starfish here. So again, I'm going to go with my outline consistency, and I'm going to try to get right to the edge, and I'm going to touch down, every time there's a turn here. These turns are really small areas, and so if it's really hard for you to have your bag in the air and do a turn, I like to get nice and close to my cookie. So you see there's a lot of little turns and it's not quite always straight lines, so I keep my bag really, really close to the cookie. It's not touching it necessarily, but just above. This way, the icing, when you're pushing the icing out of your bag, it attaches to that cookie right away. And it gives you a lot more control than if your bag is in the air and you're kind of pulling the icing into the right spot. This way, it sort of attaches right to your cookie. It's almost like you're pushing that icing onto the cookie to stick to it. Sometimes when you have it in the air, it doesn't stick well, and it's harder to do those turns. And here we go. I like to dry my outline for a few minutes and then come back and do my flood. And again, in a normal scenario, if I had, a few dozen of these cookies to do, what I would do is outline all my cookies, and then I'd come back and I would flood them all. This way that, my outline is dry and I go in with flood. The reason I do this is, it was trial and error throughout my cookie career, I guess you could say, of what worked best for me. I found when my outline was not dry and I went to go flood it, sometimes the flood will pull or push the outline, and then it wouldn't be quite in the right spot. So I find when it's dry, it really stays in the shape and it doesn't mess with my outline too much. So that's why I like to dry my outline first. And always, I take care when I go around the edges. I don't push too much on the bag. I want to control the flow of the icing. When I get to the center, then I can push a little bit harder and fill a little bit faster. But always go at your own pace. When I first started, I was really, really slow. It'll get better with practice. So just take your time if you're new, and then it'll come, as you do more cookies. So now that my first layer has crusted over, again, this means that, it's dry enough for me to pipe another layer, and this icing is just staying on top of that layer. But it's not fully dry to, touch and push on and things like that. So you have to be careful still. So I'm using my thick icing. So this is my outline consistency. I always make 2 of each color. It's not really any extra work because when I make my icing, I make it to my outline consistency, and then I just thin it down like I would anyways for my flood. And again, when you put big amounts of your outline consistency in a certain spot, it's really easy to thin out. So if you have those little peaks, you can go in with your scribe and just give it a little wiggle and it'll get rid of those peaks. Notice how I'm wiggling my bag a little bit. So what I'm trying to do is wiggle the icing smooth as it comes out of my bag. It saves me from putting my bag down, picking up my scribe, trying to, smooth it out. This way I can kind of move a little bit faster and smoother, and I won't have to, smooth out each little dot. You can see some of them have a little bit of a peak. You can go in after with your scribe. A little tip too, if your peaks are still, if your icing is starting to dry a little bit, this is thicker icing. It doesn't take too long to start crusting over. I always have a wet paper towel beside me and I just wipe my scribe on it, and the tip gets a little bit damp and it helps smooth out your icing. If your outline is really thick and you're making these, sort of balls or detailed decorations and they're not smoothing out, it could be because your icing is a little bit thick. And here I'm just adding little dots of pink icing just to give it, that look of a starfish. It's a colorful starfish. And all I'm doing is just almost touching the bag right on top of the surface. Again, this first layer is only crusted over. So if I'm poking my bag at that layer, it's gonna go right through and I'm gonna crack that icing. So I'm just hovering right above and putting some pressure and letting go. That's all I'm doing. You can always practice this on a paper towel or, you know, on a piece of parchment paper just to get the feel. But basically just squeeze, squeeze, squeeze each dot out. That's kind of all I'm doing here. And again, I have my finger guiding me, especially when you're squeezing hard, when you're squeezing thick icing out, it's really hard to keep your bag really steady. So I always have my finger there against the bag or against my hand, and it really, really helps me to keep steady. And once you're done all the dots here, all the little detail, that's it. We're done our starfish and you can put it aside to dry. Next up, we have our shell cookie. So notice I'm trying to use the same kind of color. So for one set, I'll kind of make a few colors and I'll try to use, you know, as many of those same colors in all my designs so that I'm not making a million colors, because it does take a lot of time. So if you're trying to start selling cookies and so on, you kind of want to think of, you know, sets, and think of, if you're making tons of colors and tons of details, it will take a lot more time. So make sure, you know, you charge your worth and you charge your time for it. And I'm just going to outline this here. I'm not really happy with this outline where it landed. I kind of wanted it less of a straight line. So what I'm going to do is just scrape it off with my scribe. So the icing is not dry. I just finished piping this. I'm just going to scrape it off easily. Even if this was dry at this point, it would be easy to scrape off, kind of break off, I guess, at that point. And you notice that there's a lot of bumps on the outside of the shell, but I find it really hard to pipe individual, like if I outlined each bump, you know, all the way down to the bottom of the shell, it's a lot of narrow areas. So I'm going to split the shell up into a few sections. So I'm going to include, you know, about 3 bumps in each, or, you know, 2 bumps in each. And then that way it's a lot easier to flood, and I probably will end up with less critters. And so this outline here, what it's doing is it's going to separate my icing. So again, when we do this, it helps separate the icing and keep it, you know, keep every section individual. But the other thing we do too is we're going to be flooding these sections opposite of each other, because I don't want to flood 2 sections that are, you know, kind of together. You have a chance of your flood icing going on top of the outline and kind of connecting, and so you lose that separation. Again, I have some really narrow areas here. So what I'm going to do is, you know, just put my thick icing, my outline consistency in here. And then even in these bigger areas, again, you know, if I put this cookie on my hand, the cookie is about the size of my palm. So some of these sections, they don't look very small, but in reality, they are a little bit small. And I'm always on this, you know, let's be safe rather than sorry, and, you know, prevent those craters. So I'm going to start with the outside section here. And this is my flood icing. And right away after I do those outlines, those little squiggles, I flood. So the reason I don't let that squiggle line dry is because when I go in with my flood after, if it's dry, sometimes it breaks off and it floats around in my flood. So when it's wet, it doesn't quite break and it kind of comes nice and smooth. I know some people let it dry, but like I said, I've had bad experience. Just, you know, your flood is kind of you keep your tip close to the cookie. So sometimes I get a little too close and I break it off. So now that we've done these sections here, I'm going to let this dry, and then we're going to come back when it's crusted over, and we're going to do the other section. So here, the reason I did this again is for the separation. And so that's why I didn't do a squiggle lines on each section, because I wanted that icing to still be wet. So that's why I'm doing these sections now like this. And even though this bottom section connects with the top, it's just this tiny, tiny area, and I'm going to flood it carefully so that I don't go over that baseline there. Notice when I started flooding, I didn't go right to the small tiny edge. I started kind of in the middle, and that's because it's a very small area, and when I start flooding, I always want to gauge the pressure I have to put on my bag or how fluid my icing is. And if it comes out really quickly and I don't have control, I don't want to start in a tiny area. I want to start in a bigger area so then I can gauge how much control I have. Now again, I feel like this cookie needs a little bit more definition. I'm not quite happy, you know, about how it's separated. It looks good, it stayed separate, but I feel like it just needs a little bit more detail to it. So I'm gonna add some outlines to it. And here I'm staying really close. There's a lot of curves. And so see how close my bag is, the tip of my bag is to the cookie when I do those small curves. When it's a longer line, I can lift it up a little bit more. But that's the key to kind of holding control. And then I'm going to put a little bit of a detail here in the middle bottom of the shell. And all I'm doing is taking my outline consistency in a different color here, and I'm putting pressure and pulling. And as I pull, I let go of the pressure. So I'm getting these little beads here just to give it a little pop of color. Okay, on to our mermaid tail. So this, I figured we'd do something different. And again, we're gonna do the same type of technique we just finished with the shell. And it's basically put pressure, pull, put pressure and pull. And as I pull down, I'm letting go of the pressure on the bag. So I squeeze the bag and let go as I pull down. I'm almost wiping the tip off onto the cookie, if that's what you kind of think of. And so this is giving me these beads here, and we're just gonna layer them on top of each other. This is my thick icing. So anytime that you wanna do a detail and you really want it to hold its shape, you wanna use your outline icing. And so I've got a few different colors here. I'm gonna throw in some purple and some blue every so often, just to give it a nice pop of color. And this may look like it takes a long time, but this is real time. So after you kind of get the hang of things and you've done it a few times, it goes pretty quickly actually, and it's kind of fun to do. I really like to pressure pipe. It's kind of fun and relaxing, and it's something different. And the good part is you can do it all at once, and you can finish the cookie, within one step. You don't have to wait for things to dry. Because it's thick icing, I don't have to wait for each layer to dry. I can just do layer upon layer. Now, if your icing is not holding its shape, if it's kind of running into each other or melting into each other, that means that your icing is not thick enough. So, if you do a few beads and it doesn't look like it's holding its shape, you can always scrape it off, take your icing out of the bag, put a few teaspoons of powdered sugar, mix it in nice and good, and then rebag it and try it again. If you're making a lot of these cookies, it's really much better to have a good consistency. And my outline consistency varies. Sometimes I make it thicker, sometimes I make it thinner. Most times I make it work. But if it's if it's really not working for me, if I'm doing a cookie like this where I need my consistency to be within a certain range so that I get it nice and smooth, then I will definitely, rebag my icing if needed and adjust it. If my icing is like too thick, I've had it where the outline doesn't really stick to the cookie because the icing is almost too dry. Or if my icing is too thin for an outline, when I go to do the details, it just kind of melts and it doesn't hold its shape. So there's certain things, like I said, if it really matters, if your outline mostly gets hidden, so if it's not perfect, it's okay. But if you're doing details, you kind of need it to be nice and stiff. And again, as you go and do more cookies, you'll find, the consistency that you like the best. Sometimes you'll get it wrong. I still get it wrong so many times. But the good thing is you can always adjust it and fix it or hide it. So here I'm just kind of getting in my rhythm here and just, again, pushing and pulling, pushing on the bag, pulling it out, and just layering it on top. Now my first layer ended up a little bit too spread out. I didn't quite get those little pearls kind of nice and close. So what I'm going to do is just go over it and make a little bit of a belt, I guess, on the mermaid tail. So I'm just going to take another color and go right on top. My icing is still wet here, but I'm just, I'm trying not to mess it up too much. So I'm just hovering right above it, and I'm going to add some dots of purple icing here. And then I'm going to go in and just put some blue icing right in between and just kind of keep layering them like this. Again, it's kind of, I wasn't planning to do this, but I didn't really like the way the top started off. I kind of did them a little bit too wide. So this is kind of my way to hide it. And again, if you do make mistakes, then, there's always ways to fix it. Okay, now we're going to do the mermaid tail. So what I want to do is get my outline consistency, and I'm going to cut the bag in an upside down V, so the point of the bag is going to be away from me, and I want to cut it nice and evenly with a seam in the middle, and that will give me a leaf tip so we can do the tail. Make sure you have nice sharp scissors, cut it very small at first, and do a few test runs and then cut bigger. It's always easier to cut more if you need to make it bigger. And I always give it a few test runs. So now that you have a leaf tip ready to go, so you put some pressure on your bag, and my cookie kind of started moving on me here, so I'm just gonna hold it down. And then you let go of the pressure and you pull away to get that nice edge on the end of the tail. And then again here we take our tip, put it in the middle there, and I'm going to put a steady pressure, and you can move your bag up and down to give you more ripples or less ripples. If you move your bag slower and push really hard on your bag, you'll get ripples as well. So you can kind of play around with it, but it's a really neat way to get the tail. And that's our mermaid tail cookie. Okay, now we're going to do our sand dollar cookie. So I'm going to outline it, and here I'm not going to outline the full circle. We're going to make a few little cracks and not, the perfect circle around. So here I'm just doing little kind of V's in towards the middle of the cookie, the inside of the cookie. And again, every time, I do this little V, I kind of touch down or I get nice and close to my cookie, so I get a nice kind of sharper corner. You kind of see I have my two hands there on the bag, and it helps me to keep it nice and steady. And then on the inside here with my outline consistency again, I'm going to do these teardrop shapes. And then I'm just with my outline, trying my best, touching it down, going up a little bit, making a nice rounded edge and touching it back down where I started. And then I'm going to set this to dry for a couple minutes and then come in with my flood. And then I'm going to flood around all my outlines first, just to make sure that, just to take care so I don't go over the outline. And then this way, I always go a little bit softer. Don't put so much pressure on the outline, just to keep it in check, not flood it over the cookie. So that's why I sort of did the inside flooding first. Now I'm going to do the outside, and then I'll meet them two together. Sometimes when you start with the outside, and if I work inside but I have this detail there, I have so much flood on the outside that it's going to push it all towards the middle, and it might go over my outline. So that's sort of why I did the middle first and then the outside. And my tip is pretty small here. I kind of kept it small because I did know I have those little areas to flood in the middle, but it does take a little bit extra pressure to get it all flooded in there. And then I've set it aside to crust over. And now that it's dry enough to do the details here, I'm going to take my outline consistency and just kind of repeat the pattern in between the little holes that I've left to give it a little bit more detail here. And that's our sand dollar cookie. I hope you enjoyed this under the sea tutorial, and we'll see you in the next one.